Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hey, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. Today we're going to continue my discussion on the houses, the astrological houses. I talked about houses 1 through 3 before, and I gave you a brief introduction into the logic of the houses, which I'm going to review as well. We have a chart up here of an unusual person. His name is John Doe. His birthday is April 1st, 1952, 4:31 p.m. in Meriden, Connecticut. And my point in using this chart was just to give an example of how valuable it is for the chart orientation to be right. Now, you always hear me talking about the birth time. The birth time is what sets what's called the ascendant. This is the ascendant right here. This is the beginning of the first house. When you know the birth time, that clicks in the chart into the place at the exact spot. If this was 4:31 a.m., the chart would be exactly the opposite, and Pisces, which is over there, would be over here. So because of the orientation of the chart and the timing of the chart, that's where the planets land within these different houses. Each of these slices that you see in this pizza pie here, there's 12 slices there. Those are called the houses. That's where the activity takes place in the individual's chart. Now, this is an individual chart. Your chart, or anybody else's chart is out there, is going to look very different than this. Even charts of twins look different by various modifications depending upon how close they are born in time. But what this does is gives us a sense of the orientation, in other words, the playing field of the chart. If this were to turn, and the Earth turns 1 degree every 4 minutes, so the zodiac wheel turns 1 degree every 4 minutes. So if there were a set of twins, and one was born at 11:30 and one was born at 11:34, this number would change. This would change 1 whole degree down the other way. So it's important to understand that all of these things are just like a gigantic clock, the movement. So the wheel turns, 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 and as a result of that, we see that all of this activity happens according to the basis of that time. Now, you can do an astrology chart without the birth time. You're just not going to get as much accuracy with regard to what I call the granularity. What you want is the precision for, like this person at 4:31, boom, that's his rising sign, which is Virgo in this case. You can see that, okay? The next person who's born, say if they were born instead of AM in PM, as I said, if they're born in AM, the whole chart would reverse, and that would change dramatically where that sun was, because the sun in this person's chart is in the 7th house, as you can see right there. If we were to turn it around the other way, based on the time of birth, the sun would be in the 1st house, which is a dramatically different person, altogether different person, different personality type. This is why it's so important to understand the way the houses work. And my point here is not to be an expert in this field, but just to educate you as to why the houses are so valuable and what you can learn from them. So, and this is depending upon how granular you want to get. But once you get a copy of your chart, and you can get a copy of your chart from me at turningofthewheel.com or chrisflisher.com, contact me via email. I'll send you your chart, and then you'll be able to look at it and understand it. If you want to get it interpreted, obviously that's something different. But we're going to be talking about the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th houses today. Last time I was on, we talked about the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. 1st, 2nd, 3rd. So now we're continuing on. We work in a counterclockwise motion around the wheel. And so that's for the 4th house is down here, the 5th house, and the 6th house. We're going to get as far as the 6th house, and then the next segment I talk about, we'll do 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, 12 from there in that point. So it's important to understand that, and that's why I wanted to refresh you about the idea of the orientation of the charts, because it's very important that you know where the chart is and how this is oriented, because you want to know, because the houses indicate where the activity will take place. In other words, the theme will take place. If you've got certain planets in certain houses at certain times, that's where you're going to find the activity. This is why predictive astrology works. Now, what we have displayed here is called a natal chart, a natal astrology chart. This is a snapshot or a fingerprint of this person on this particular day of their birth. This is what's called a static chart. It never changes. This will always be their chart for as long as they live. It's like their fingerprint. It's like their DNA. I like to think of it, this is their owner's manual. This is the rules of engagement. This is how you understand this person. Okay, very important. So when you take this static chart and you bring it into the world of today, whatever day that may be, and you put another chart on the outside, that is how we get the predictive quality of astrology. But I'll get into that in a different time down the road. I want to get more in tune with the houses right now. Now, in the past, you've heard me talk about the houses in great length, and it's very important that we know where they land. We can interpret this person's chart. We see his sun is in the 7th house, we see the moon is in the 10th house, and we see his rising sign is in Virgo. So those 3 data points are important for any amateur astrologer. Just to know those 3 points alone gives you enormous insight into the person. The reason the rising sign is so important, you've heard me talk in the past if you've been following me, which I hope you have. The rising sign indicates sort of the way the person represents themselves to the world. It's how they present themselves. There's no other way to say it. It's sort of the attributes, their character is there. Because the rising sign is literally the mask that we wear. That's the sort of the metaphor for what we're talking about, the mask that we wear. So even though this person has 12 degrees Aries is the sun, his rising sign is 22 degrees Virgo. So yes, he has the Aries fire beneath him and all that, but the rising sign indicates the sort of the way he presents himself. So that person is one who's very methodical, a communicative person, a person who likes to serve. And as this person grows older, they're going to become more and more like the Virgo rising sign, in my opinion, because it makes sense. If you have, this is your skin, and if you feel more comfortable in your skin, you're going to grow into their skin. You're going to be very, very, very comfortable in your skin. Another way of thinking about the rising sign is if you saw somebody in a uniform in a play, for example. Someone came out in hospital scrubs or in a police uniform or whatever, a business outfit, you would immediately know what that person was. That is also the purpose of the rising sign. The purpose of the rising sign is that it serves that function. So now that we know that and we've gotten that little refresher out of the way, I want to sort of let you know that every one of your charts is going to be different. So that's the first thing we know, but that's why the birth time is so important. The time of birth will give us that granularity, and that'll change. Now, granted, you've got a 2-hour window for each sign because, as I said, the sun moves 1 degree every 4 minutes. So, on any day, regardless of the time of year, on any day, the planet's going to be turning those 4 degrees. As it turns, the sun is going to be in a different sign for that day only. This is what's called the rising sign, is what's on the horizon at the time of birth. That changes everything. So that's why it's important, because oftentimes, one of the ways of thinking about astrology is that we really are a composite of all of these signs. You know, we think of ourselves as being Geminis or Aquarius or Capricorns, but we really are a composite of all signs. Yes, the focus for the person is where the sun lands initially. That determines your sun sign and all the other planets. But what is really most important with that regard is that it has a sense of continuity, and there's this degree of precision with regard to the rising sign. So, as I mentioned in the past, I'm sure, there's many adjectives for all of the different houses. In fact, there are books and books and books on who is in what house and what the house rules. When we refer to a house, that is the section of the astrology chart dictated by a theme. Okay, there's 12 themes, okay? The first theme is the house of self. Second house is the house of money. Third is the house of communication. Fourth is family. Fifth is children and creativity. Sixth is service and health. Seventh is relationship. 8 is the house of death and sex. That sounds really ominous, I know, but it really is the house of regeneration. So that's the house of elderly people. It's the house of large entities, legal entities. The 9th house is the house of spirituality, travel, and education. The 10th house is the house of occupation. Occupation means how you get paid or how you spend your time. Not everybody gets paid for spending their time. If you're a student, you're not getting paid. Matter of fact, you're paying money. So it's important to understand that. The 11th house is the house of business collaborations and friendships, very important there, and who you associate with. And the 12th house is the house of transition and endings. So today we're going to discuss the 4th house, the 5th house, and the 6th house, okay? And I'm going to use my books for that because there are so many, as I can tell you, there's just pages and pages of things that fall into that house. Now, why is it important to know what attributes are in the house? Well, it's important because you're going to find a certain drive of the individual there. A person with a sun in the 7th house, as we see here, is going to be motivated towards relationships. They're going to take on a greater value than the person who has the sun in, say, the 10th house. The sun in the 10th house is going to be all about career. That's where their focus is going to be. And it's not to say that someone with the sun in the 7th house isn't focused on their career. They are. But what's most important, one of the dominating drivers for that, motivators for that person, is the relationship, because they're in the 7th house. So that's just to get you oriented. If you have questions about this, you can always contact me via my website, chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. There's a chance there for you to email me. You get me your birth date, your birthplace, your birth time. I'll send you back a chart. Or I'll set up a time to read your chart for you, which I do all the time as well. And you'll also learn about this from my podcast, Turning of the Wheel, which is on iTunes and other podcast outlets. So there's a similar themes what we're going on here. It's all about education. In my podcast, I talk more with other astrologers to get you guys enlightened about certain topics and stuff like that. So that's really important. That's what we're talking about there. So the first word, I always think that the easiest way to learn astrology, and I teach astrology at the local high schools and other places as well, introduction to astrology. I think the easiest way to understand astrology is to try to take, because it is so complicated. You've got all these variables. You've got 12 signs, you've got 10 planets, you've got 12 houses, you've got aspects, you've got this, that. Very complicated. A lot of data to mull through and to try to parse. So what's important about it is that because we have so many attributes, I think the first thing you want to think about with the 4th house is the house of family and home. It's the house that is ruled, and each house is a ruler. It's the house that's ruled by the moon. The moon is in Cancer. And if we had a static chart that was starting with Aries at the beginning, Cancer would align with the 4th house. But we think of Cancer as the ruler of the 4th house. Now, what does that mean? It means that the moon is in charge. So what makes more sense than to have the moon be in charge of the family? This is the mother represents, the moon represents the mother, and the mother is the maternal quality that we all come from, and that's where our basic primal urges come from, our family. So the 4th house is all about family, but it's also about a lot of other things. There's things that has to do with children, has to do with authority, birthplace, domestic life. Domestic life is incredibly important. Everything that happens in that 4th house is domestic life. Now, in this particular person's chart, as you can see, there's a symbol on there. Those are called glyphs, and I'll go through the glyphs at some point in time further down the road. But what we see here, this is Chiron. Chiron is the planet of the wounded healer. This particular person has perhaps some work to do in the 4th house regarding healing with their family. What was their relationship with their family? As I said, this is a generic chart. John Doe, we don't know who he is. I just pulled these numbers out of the air. But by looking at this, if I were to meet this person, I would say, yes, this person has some issues to deal with regard to family. There is a working through process involved with his sort of coming unto his own in that regard. So all the other things, so mother is obviously in the 4th house, the house that's ruled there. Journeys, the father, mother, because they form the family unit, are part of that. There's lots of other things that are a part of. Grandchildren are part of this, farms and farming, all of those sort of maternal buildings, sort of the home place, the house, the physical structure of the house is in that 4th house as well. So anything has to do with domesticity or anything along those lines is going to fall into the 4th house. So people if someone has a sun or a moon in their 4th house, they're going to be very domestically oriented. They're going to be the kind of person who's grounded and feels best when they're in their home. Now, astrology is a complicated science and art form. It is based on a lot of variables, a lot of distinctions, descriptions, and a lot of different attributes, all of which have to be sort of what we call homologulated or synthesized is the best word, Noel Till's word, synthesized in a way where we're able to come out of this whole particular thing with a sense of who the person is. This is incredibly important to be able to understand who this person is. So we talk about the 4th house as having all things to do with family, home, and the domestic scene. So what does that look like? You put Saturn in the 4th house, that person's going to be very responsible with their home and their whole domestic scene. So it's important to understand that. But anything that has to do with their family. So we can extend that to be cousins, grandparents, and the extended family, siblings in some cases are there, although the 3rd house is more involved with the siblings than the 4th. We can actually see them fitting into both places. But there's plenty of things that work there. With regard to, it's like about parents, it's about a person sharing a home. Roommates would also fall in there. Physical strength would fall into there. Servants, rooming houses, dormitories would also fall in there. Anything that has to do with your physical living in a place or any of the themes that surround that are 4th house topics. Very, very important. As I said, this is a place for real estate. This is a place for public buildings, property, people sharing homes, as I said, roommates, Stepchildren also fall in this because it's part of the family. If you get remarried and you fall into that, you're going to have stepchildren in there as well. So all of those things having to do with home, security, domesticity, relatives, mother, father, cousins, stepbrothers, all those things, and the extended family that goes with that are going to fall into that fourth house, and that's how we ascribe that. So to be really interesting, one of the best things you can do is you can go to my website, turningthewheel.com, or chrisflisher.com. I forgot my name, chrisflisher.com, and when you're there, you will find a Learning Astrology drop-down. You can go there, you can go and see what the fourth house is all about. It gives you a quick summation, easy to remember summation of what the fourth house is all about. And once you understand the fourth house and you sort of allow your intellect to tease that idea out, you will find the idea that, oh, that makes perfect sense. This is a fourth house issue. This is where divorce probably lands. And divorce obviously runs across the seventh because it's relationship, but fourth house is also about the dissolution of the family. So that's also another key point to that, okay? So we're going to move on from there to the fifth house, which is the next house up, which in this case is right up there. You can see it where it says 5 above there. That's that one piece. I'll show you with my mouse here. This is the fifth house. This house is empty. The first question people ask, oh, if my fifth house is empty, that means I have no children and no creativity. Quite the opposite. It means that you have the ability to fill that in. It's a free, clear slate where you can actually elaborate and expand on that. Now, the fifth house is all about children and creativity. This is where it's the house that's ruled by the sun. It's ruled by Leo. So this is sort of the creator, and that's why it's there. The creator is the father. The father is the creator. We think of that as a metaphorical term. But the fifth house is all about creativity. This is where you're going to find some of the most creative people in the world. We have a strong placement there. Artists, you might find their sun there. Writers, you might find their Mercury there. An actor, you might find their Mercury there. And this is the kind of thing you'd find with the fifth house. The fifth house is all about creativity, but it's also about children. Children, because children have that sense of innocence. There's a sense of newness to them. There's a sense of, all sorts of how they are presented to the world. So the fifth house takes into account children, creativity, adopted children, innovation is a key word, creativity, adventure, adornment. So adornment would be sort of the way people dress themselves, where they have a fancy hat on or a nice necktie. This is all the area where you would see that, someone who likes to be lavish in the way they present themselves. Also very bold and charismatic and creative with regard to how they put themselves out to the world. This is a matter of expression. Other words that we see down there, we see concerts, the theater. All these things are big there because they are creative endeavors. So art, music, poetry, literature, dance, drama, all those things spring out of that. Entertainment is a general thing. It all springs out of the fifth house. So someone who has a strong fifth house, or planets in their fifth house, or planets transiting their fifth house, which I'll get to at a further segment down the road, will see activity in that house, and this is how this comes to fruition. It's a fascinating subject to see this. So we can see hobbies would be on display there, because hobbies are sort of a form of expression. Happiness, courtships, all kinds of enjoyments. It's a house of enjoyment. When I do astrology, when I write predictive astrology for some of the newspapers that I work for around the country, and I look and seeing something going through the fifth house, I'll always say, wow, it's going to be a great day to party. Because if the sun is there or Jupiter's there, it means expansion in the fifth house. It means a fun day or a fun year or a fun month, forever how long that planet's there. It's a really, really wonderful time to sort of experience and an expression of having time and having a good time there. So this could extend to theater, as I said, performing, nightclubs, for example, comedy shows, anything like that. All those things will work into that area. Films, of course, films are also part of personal expression, which comes down again to that Leo sun. If the Leo is the ruler of the fifth house, then all the qualities of the fifth house were going to be there as well. So you're going to see characteristics such as I said, mirth, comedy, character, expression, all forms of personal expression. You could even say right now I'm having a fifth house moment because I'm expressing myself to you on the television. It's also, has to do with the flip. Some of the flip side is there as well. So the fourth house is directly opposite the 10th house, so you have to take into account that's just the opposite. So you're going to work in the morning for your 10th house, you're spending most of your time, you're doing that to support your fourth house, which is your home and family. So as I mentioned, we have Adopted children are also part of that, and stepchildren are part of that because they are brought into the family, as I mentioned earlier. Cinemas, circuses, obviously. Cinemas and circuses because they're fun, right? Nightclubs, any form of nightclub performers, motion pictures, love affairs, love making, one's loves, journeys, short and long, parks, parties, partners, sexual intercourse is there, recreation, risks in some cassette saloons. So you see what happens. It's all about a sense of this entertainment expression, personal expression. People express themselves when they're in relationships, and to express yourself creatively is really the perfect manifestation of our purpose in life, is to create and to express ourselves in ways that make us look whole and right. And so it's important that we understand that, because without knowing what our talents are, we really don't understand where we're going. And I think to express yourself is a very, very liberating experience for anybody, and to know that you have that ability. Now, most people who are expressive know that. They already know that they're expressive, and they go ahead and they create. They're artists, they're writers, that's what they do for a living. But to be able to know what's going on in your fifth house and say, like I said, this person's fifth house is empty. Does that mean that they have nothing go on there? No. It means they have the ability to fill that up with great potential. And they can be a very expressive person. If anything, it provides them an opportunity to do just that. The fact that the houses are empty in some cases means that those people are maybe more prone to that even, okay? In this case, you see the ninth house is empty as well. That person may be more prone to travel, maybe more prone to go into education, maybe a more spiritual person than usual. It's the fact that the houses are empty means they have the greatest potential to espouse the characteristic of that house. Okay, so we're talking about the fifth house still. So I mentioned stepbrothers, all those things. And that, don't forget, it's actually the physical manifestation of what we're doing with regard to how we create. So the artwork, as I mentioned before, is very important. All of those are really important. So let's go move on to the sixth house. The sixth house is an interesting house. It's the one that's right over at the end here. You see those, it's the far side over here. I'll use my mouse to see. Right here is the sixth house. You can see the six right there. And these are all divided up. And I use a house system called Placidus, which means that they are based on the degree going all the way around. They vary somewhat, but it's precise, and it's what I find to be most useful for my personal practice when I do readings for other people. Other people use whole sign houses, which means that just the sign itself is in the house as you go around. And there's many, many different forms of this. But I would argue that if based on the sort of the underlying logic and ideas of astrology, that all people who are within a range of regardless of the house system that you use, you should still come away with a very similar idea of who that person is based on what the analysis of the chart and how you're reading it. There's many ways this is like reading a map. And it is a diagram that requires, you have to understand what the glyphs mean, you have to understand the numbers, you have to understand the interrelationship of them. Those lines that are going back and forth, I will talk to you about those later in the middle there. Those are called aspects within the chart, and those are what indicate the key strengths and weaknesses of the individual. So let's move on to the sixth house. The sixth house is this one over here, as I mentioned, and in this case, the sixth house is ruled by Virgo, and the ruling planet is Mercury. And it's attributed to, so Virgo is very much of a giving sign. It's a service-oriented sign. It's what's called a mutable earth sign. In that regard, this is where Virgos are where we find doctors, lawyers, dentists, people who serve others, who serve to help. Nurses especially, and dental hygienists. Those are the people who get out and they live to help other people. It's very important. So the sixth house is obviously about service, okay? Service and daily work habits. So this is where you might find your daily work habits. Now the work habits, the occupation tends to be the 10th house, but your day-to-day routine is manifested and represented by the sixth house. And so you have opportunity going through your sixth house and the transiting planets. You've got if you have a strong sun there, I know one of my clients who's got a lot of like 6 or 7 planets all in the sixth house. Now, this person is not a Virgo, but because of that orientation and because all those planets located in the sixth house, this person is very much of a giving person. This is a selfless person who gives. That is their modus operandi. That is their reason to be, is to give. And so all that activity, even though they're not a Virgo per se, all the activity, all those planets crammed into the sixth house means that their whole drive, their whole reason to be is based on the act of service and health. So those two characteristics are very important. So the sixth house is, and there's parts of the body that are related to the individual houses as well. But primarily what we see are service. So obviously service, just by nature of the word alone, implies military service. The military, the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy. Those are represented by that. We'll also find in there, so service is about your jobs. It has to do with animals, small or domestic, animal husbandry. Brothers-in-law or in-laws are part of the sixth house as well. Civil service. Politicians, in some regard, regardless of how you feel about them, their purpose, supposedly, is to serve others. They're supposed to be a public servant. They typically have a strong sixth house component, and that's the house that the sixth house rules. So anybody who's in a service-oriented business, butlers, dentists, lawyers, school teachers even, anybody who serves others or wants to help others, their goal is to help others. That's the primary purpose of this. So anything that serves, fire departments, police departments, domestic servants, doormen. I know we don't have many, nobody has many doormen these days, but anyway, it is part of it. But also, I mentioned that this is the house of health. So illnesses are going to fall in here. We're going to have illnesses, you're going to have, depending upon where, it typically is in the case of the sixth house, it's typically the abdomen, the stomach is where we find problem. So all of the other things that go in here, and it's all about this sense of all medical professions, all legal professions in some ways, because they do serve people, all fall in the sixth house. And it's, so that takes in a whole realm of occupations: janitors, cooks, chefs, anybody, the plumbers, people who come to service your house. This is where you find that strong sixth house component, and it's really important to understand that. As I said, there are pages and pages of them, but I think if you just think of the word service as your primary thing, you'll come up with that. Nursing, obviously, post office, policemen, public health, relatives, restaurant workers, welfare, voluntary labor, tenants, stepchildren, societies, sickness and service rooms, and sickness is a part of it too. So if you had some sort of bad aspect going on in your sixth house, you'd find a person who may be have more disease or more prone to disease. This particular person has the good fortune of having Venus there, so they tend to have a fairly good constitution or health in that case. But this is just an opposite. This is a chart. Your chart is going to be different. I'm only using this chart as a sense of illustration just to get you straight with the orientation. And I want to reiterate the idea of the orientation. This whole chart can switch either way based on the time of day. And if I change this from PM to AM, this whole chart would flip-flop, and everything that's on that side of the chart would be over here. Everything that's on this side of the chart would be over there. So those two, that's a very important thing, because that would change the person dramatically. Instead of this person having Venus in the sixth house, he'd have Venus in the first house, which would mean he'd be very approachable, very friendly, very knowledgeable, very easy to get along with, and probably a pretty good-looking person if you were to reverse this chart, because that would mean Venus on near the ascendant always gives that sense of, that great attractiveness that's sort of universally accepted, universally loved. This person has it in the sixth house. So physicians, policemen, post office, public health, politicians, all these people. I know we don't always agree that politicians serve, even though they don't always seem that way. They are supposed to. So it's important to understand that. So the fourth house is home, family, domestic scenes. Fifth house is children and creativity. The sixth house is daily work and service and health. Those are the three that we covered this time. The next time I come back and we do another segment, I will continue my way around the 7th, 8th, and 9th, and you'll get a better idea. You can always go to my website, turningofthewheel.com or chrisflisher.com, and thanks for listening.